I am, as I said, Sinead, Chief Executive of Education Support. We are the charity that exists to support the mental health and well-being of everyone working in the sector. And we do that because we believe that better well-being leads to better outcomes for everyone. We've been at this since 1877. I know I'm looking good on it, but we still have plenty of work to do. And we, in terms of how we work, we directly support education staff. We work with schools and colleges, and then we research the health of the workforce and use the findings from that research to lobby for improvement with policymakers, with governments across the four nations of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. And a big part of the work that we do is hearing directly from people who have experience of the different topics that we deal with. And today is no different. I'm delighted that we are partnering with the NAHT for this particular webinar. And toward the end of the session, we'll post a link that shares a resource we've co-developed with the NAHT that talks more about some of the topics we'll be touching on today. But let me begin by introducing you to our excellent panel. We'll do some introductions and then we're going to get stuck in to the conversation. I'm also going to say to colleagues who are listening, there is a Q&A button, I think, at the bottom of the screen. I say that, I can't see my own. Yes, there is. John's not nodding. So if you have questions as we go through, don't feel like you need to be polite and wait. Lash them in there, and it's my job then to steer the conversation so that we make sure we pick those questions up as we go. But to our marvelous panel. So first of all, let me introduce John. John has 38 years as an educator under his belt, 26 of those as a head in West Sussex. And John retired in 2022. He's still involved in a variety of things, roles across the sector, some of which I imagine we might talk about. And given the struggle I have in my own life with my allotment, I was particularly, he's a keen allotmenteer. I will be talking to him about couch grass at the end of this, for sure. Also delighted to have Anne Neville join us. Anne was teaching for 33 years. She headed both drama and English departments through her career and was a union rep. And she's got some wonderful role modeling to do for us. She threw herself fully into her passion of the theatre upon retirement, but has also maintained a connection with the profession in various ways. So again, we'll look forward to hearing more of your story as we go through. And then finally, last but not least, delighted to welcome Ralph McGee, who is a head teacher in Northern Ireland, retired in 2023. And in the preparatory conversation we had in the lead up for this, I was very struck by Ralph's thoughtfulness on the issues that we were talking about. I didn't say this to you, Ralph. I found you particularly zen at one point. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of that as we go through today's conversation. So welcome all of you. For any colleagues who've joined to listen to this conversation, the format is pretty straightforward. We've got a few conversation starters and questions that we're going to talk about. It's an informal conversation between us, and we'll go through those topics. But as I say, if there are particular things you want to hear about or you want us to touch on, if we are able to, we will pick up the baton and take those conversational topics on board. But let me begin with John. Let me start with you. And so we've got folks who've arrived from all over the country to listen to this conversation. Some parts of the world apparently are sunny. So that's glad to hear that. But what should people be starting to think, if they're starting to think about retirement, if they're coming up to retirement, what kinds of things would you suggest that they could begin to be thinking about or doing in advance?
Hi, Sinead. Thank you, everyone. I think, first of all, think about retirement before you're planning to retire, because I was in a very fortunate position that I was able to choose when I went. But I think we're very aware that not everybody has that luxury. So as far as you're able, get your ducks in a line in terms of the finance, pensions and so on. But also, I think, a very wise woman, Jazan Paul-Farr, said to me, I was talking to her about all the things I wanted to do when I finished working. And she said, yeah, but how do you want to feel? And that really struck me as, I'd made the traditional list of all these things I was going to do when I had time, but actually I hadn't really reflected on how did I want to feel after 38 years of 100% work life. So I think they were the key things for me to start with.
Lovely. I couldn't get my microphone off in time there. I love that. How do you want to feel is a great question. Because of course there's so many practicalities to think about. We can forget, I think, sometimes around that. Um, Anne, what would you be saying to people would be useful for them to be thinking about at this stage if they were coming up to imagining their retirement?
Well, I think it's important to get things in place earlier. In fact, I'm a passionate believer in teachers having something outside of teaching all through their career as a way of balancing, of a way of feeding yourself. Because I don't think if you're not fed, I don't think you can feed the kids. And so that's what I did all the way through. I mean, I did 5 years of teaching, and then I started theatre work, acting a lot, and then directing as well. And so I would say to people, get stuck into stuff well before retirement age. And then you've got something, you've got your rock to lean on when you come out the other side. And um, I think that's so vital when you're approaching it. It's much less scary. You don't have this great, vacant space with nothing in it after, I mean, when we have holidays, we just spend the first 3 weeks falling apart and resting and becoming a human being again. And then by the time we've recovered, it's time to go back. But when you've got that huge space opening for the rest of your life, it can be quite scary. So I do believe in making the preparations before you retire so that you can then take those things onward with you. And then, of course, adding others as you go. I think important things are things like exercise, having a really good social life, keep learning, keep learning. I spent this morning doing a literature class on Yeats, and fascinating, intellectually so stimulating. So I would say that, if you cover all those bases, you won't go far wrong.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne. I'm going to resist the temptation to remember the tiny bit of Yates I can recall. I'm going to have we will definitely come back to social contact. I think that's going to be something we talk more about.
Yeah.
Ralph, if you were chatting to people who were thinking and beginning to think, yeah, it's on the horizon, I can start to see it coming, what would you be suggesting they start to think about?
Thanks, Sinead, and hello, everybody. Yeah, I think, well, obviously, being the third in a row, I'm not going to disagree with what's already been said by both John and Anne. I think preparation is really important. Talk to colleagues who either have just retired, who are also thinking about retiring. Get yourself in the right mindset. It's Try not to do it. Maybe the intensive conversations, maybe not too early, because then you become fixated on it. I think, yes, you do have to do the financial bit and all of that kind of task driven side of it. But I think mentally preparing is really important, and actually be open to people, declare your interest, declare your intention early. I spoke to one uh, colleague who was actually on the appointments panel when I was appointed in the school, and he told me three very simple things, and it really resonated with me. And he said, do something for yourself, do something for your family, and do something for the community. And there's at least one member of the audience, I saw his name on the screen, who will maybe have heard the same thing from the same person. And that really resonated. Nice and simple, but it just reminded me that there are different elements and different grades of engagement, I suppose. We come from very, very busy jobs, very busy working lives. You can't just abdicate from all of that. You've still got a head that thinks planning, thinks organization, thinks time management. But I think doing stuff is great. That's really important, and to have an identity, as Anne said, outside of school. But I think I would also put a little marker down that be prepared to reflect, be prepared to take time out, be prepared to slow down, and to get used to not having something busy in every single day. We come from jobs where you're busy every single minute of every single day, and you can't replicate that, nor should you in retirement, because you're retired. So I think that's an important side issue. Well, not side issue, it's an important issue. Just be prepared to reflect a little bit and slow down the pace.
That's lovely. I think we're going to come back to this point about space and time. I think later on in this conversation, but just coming, John, to what Ralph was saying there about something for yourself, something for your family, something for your community. Of course, working in education, you're in the community, you're serving a community, and at the same time, it's one aspect of being part of a community, I think. And I guess there's a whole bunch of other things that once you are not on the timetable in the same way, become possible. And I know you've talked and worked with a lot of people around that sense of community. How do you think that, how do people go about beginning to make relationships and connect?
I think, certainly my experience, I never chose to live where I worked. So my school community and my home community were always very different. Having lived in the village where I do for 25 years, I think I realised that actually that was all I was doing here when I was working. I was just sleeping in the village effectively. Well, obviously sleeping in my house in the village. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've actually really connected with my market town, my village as a community, by getting involved in things. I'm a churchyard gardener. I was there this morning in the pouring rain doing 3 hours, looking after the graveyard and so on. And I think something Ralph said as well, you really have to work at those relationships. A lot of your friends and colleagues will still be working. And I think it takes time, but the value and the joy in making new friends and really working hard at being part of a community with other like-minded people who actually just you haven't met before and you haven't had time to meet before is just a joy.
Lovely. And on this point about, community and wider networks of people, you obviously were holding multiple things while still working. That's been very important to you, and you've
Yeah.
said that.
Yeah.
But was there any other reflections you had on going out and meeting other people
Well,
and connecting?
a friend of mine had a walking group, and I joined it. And I have gradually brought in several other of my ex-colleagues who gradually retired. So we've got 5 people from my school in our walking group, and it sort of spans about 20. But not everybody comes every week. But it's wonderfully supportive. Everybody, if anyone's having a problem, everybody mucks in and helps them out. Soup arrives at your door if you're ill. That sort of thing. It's wonderful. And I also, in terms of maintaining relationship with your school, I do invigilation 4 times a year for the mocks and the final exams. And again, you go to the staff room and they're all still there, the ones that you taught with, ones you gave jobs to, so you keep up with what's going on in the school at the time. So that's very, very nice to do as well.
Lovely. And Ralph, Alan's posted a question here which touches on something that we've talked about. And Alan's question is, how do you fill the time that work takes up? Because, you can't be on holiday all the time. This distinction between being retired and being on holiday and having space. I know you've got your own personal experience, but you also, all of you, have known and worked with others who've gone through this. So you have, not necessarily just your own observations, but what you've seen with others. So Ralph, this point about being on holiday versus being retired and the space that's left, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean the point is well made. Obviously, you can't be on holiday all the time, and I think teachers actually, in some ways, are practiced at a different type of holiday period anyway, because they're on holiday for longer than most other people, and it's actually about being in a different place, in a different space, and at a different pace anyway. Summer holidays. So we're not entirely unused to that. I think everybody I've spoken to and through our discussions yesterday and over my time with NAHT as well, everybody does something different, does something new that occupies both time in your head and time practically, during the week or during the month or whatever it might be. I think everybody ends up doing something. Again, as I say, I certainly don't want to be doing something every day. And if I am doing things, I want to be busy doing different things that interest me. So it's being busy on my own terms. I'm involved with local history society, advanced motorcycle group, school governor, teaching college is still I'm still quite connected to the education world in that sense. But that will run out that will run out eventually, by which time something else will have come along. I think don't be frightened of, as Anne, I think, said, be curious, have a look. Don't rush into stuff. Don't volunteer for every committee that you're asked to be on. Especially, we've all been very, very busy. We've all been good at organization and good at committees, but you will be asked to do a lot potentially, and you have to be very careful of not saying yes to everything and hoping for the best, because you will run out of energy and you'll run out of time to commit, and people then maybe take that the wrong way. So I think that you want to find something that's new, will find something that's new. Be curious, go out into your community. John, unlike you, I live literally 150 yards from my office, but I'm sort of hidden away. Most people are probably going, "My goodness, that's horrendous," but it isn't horrendous. I lived here before I got the job, but I have discovered things going on in my own community that I would have maybe been aware of, but not knowledgeable about. So I find that interesting, and actually being around the place and finding out what other people do. Education's very silo, like we're all stuck in a school, and really, when you're not, you realize there's a whole world outside beyond the wall. Lots of interesting people doing lots of interesting things, and I find that quite interesting myself. So you're learning all the time. But just be careful with how many things that you volunteer. Things will come along. I would almost guarantee that. And things that you don't yet know, which is also quite exciting.
I love this point about, you made the remark there, Ralph, about being busy on your own terms, which I like a lot. And just, Renata, you're really welcome to be here. I'm turning 50 this year. I think it's a super helpful conversation thinking about. So you're very welcome. You're in the right place. But there is something, going back to the question that that Alan asked there, which I think is, it seems to me, and I think about the folks that I know who've made transitions and retired and so on, there is something uncomfortable for some people in the space and in the re-regulating, being not on a busy schedule, being in less demand in some ways. And we will come to, in some of the questions you're asking about sense of purpose, but just staying with this transition, this moment of going from being, you've got your foot to the floor, going 90 miles an hour, and then you don't, unless you've done what Anne did and you've tapered off your time. But many people go from fully on to fully off. Is it fair to say that that just is a point in time that you kind of have to go through and learn to be in your own skin a little bit, but also maybe hold on to the idea that it's a state, it's a temporary state of being. It's not a permanent condition. It's just a transition. Does that resonate? Does that seem fair?
Yeah.
I think so, Sinead. I think that's a really good point. I think we all go through a point where it is a bit like jumping off a cliff, even if you're prepared to jump off the cliff. And there is a transitory period. And you know what? It's okay. And if you've talked to people around retirement, and we've all said about planning and so on, that can't come as a massive surprise, but it is a temporary phase, and it might last a few weeks. It might last a couple of months. It might last 6 months. I talked to a colleague recently who said it lasted about a year before she felt really, really comfortable in her own skin, her new retirement skin, if you like. But I think one of the things about having stress or experience stress is about just recognize it, accept it. You don't need to necessarily analyze it, but just know it's there, and then just work through. But no, like issues in school, issues come up in school that are very taxing, very stressful, but they all pass. They all pass. They get put in a filing cabinet, and you move on. And I think some of those stresses around retirement and the end of something are difficult. But do remember there will be new beginnings around the corner.
Yeah, lovely.
And I think what worked beautifully for me, and this was the most exciting day of my life, was the first day of the autumn term after I retired. I went on holiday. For the first time in 62 years, I had a term time holiday. And picking up Ralph's point, we spent 6 weeks traveling around Scotland, and that was my 6 weeks to reflect on what's coming next. I think what was crucial for me was I carried things on that I was already doing. So I was already a governor at my village school. So I still had that in my if you like, my repertoire. But also I found that 6 weeks was, I'm on holiday again. And it was very much a time for reflection and for planning and to think about, and again, as Ralph said, absolutely right, don't do too much of anything to start with. A friend of mine who's not in teaching loves golf, and when he retired, he started playing golf 3-4 times a week. And when other things came on that he wanted to do, he didn't want to let his mates down. So there's a real wisdom in taking your time to grow into what I think you want to do and how you want to feel, as Ralph and Anne say.
I could certainly imagine being that person who'd go, I'm not really happy here to sit. I'm going to go and play golf because it's a thing to do. I'll do a thing, and then I know how to be in that mode. But actually hearing what you're all saying there about just to sit with the time and to take the time. And I guess it's a bit like changing gears, that you sort of, you need the moment the clutch goes in, you're changing gear, and then you've got to adjust to being in this different speed.
Yeah. I think that I think the bell, which is symbolic of the fact you always have to be at this point in this time, otherwise the world will fall apart. That takes a bit of getting used to, with the knowledge that actually it doesn't matter if you're 5 or 10 minutes late for something. That sort of stress, we're always rushing. To get to the next class, ruled by the bell, and that's one of the great relaxing things about retirement. I think that you don't have that anymore, and you've got time and space to get and do what you want to do, without that awful drivenness that you've lived with all your life as a teacher.
But the other side of that, Anne, and I'm going to come, Ralph, I'm going to come to you, but just the other side of that then, Anne, is obviously, look, you taught, and you clearly taught with passion, and you loved the job. There's a big sense of purpose there. It's a big part of who you are. It's who you still are, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
How does that feel then, when that sort of no longer is in the day to day? It's not so central to your identity at this point in life. How do you sit with that, or how do you?
Well, I mean, I've actually carried on teaching. I'm teaching my granddaughter at the moment, Jekyll and Hyde, which we both dislike intensely. But I've carried on teaching pupils, privately. They come to my house, or they did before COVID, and then we did it on Zoom. So I've carried on very much engaged in the curriculum and the developments of that. So I haven't really felt that loss terribly much. I'm still doing it. I'm 80 this year.
Lovely. I love that. And Ralph, maybe school, being a head teacher is probably less easy to do that on a peripatetic basis. You're in or you're out. How do you hold that sense of identity and that shift of, kind of being the main man and all of the stuff that goes with that and what that means, and then not?
I think I was like John. I was really lucky. I retired at a very clever time, because the Rugby World Cup was on literally in the day I retired. So off I went to France for a couple of weeks. I wish I'd gone for 3 or 4, but my wife, she was still working, so she had to go back. But we had a great trip, and yes, and you do reflect a lot. You reflect on holiday anyway. I find to be kind of brutally honest about it, some of the times were tough in the first few months, and you see change happening. You hear about different things going on. You can't just disconnect from a life that you've had for 24/7. That would be naive. So when things were tougher, you were thinking about still doing the job and knowing that you can't do the job. I kind of committed a wee bit to paper, and I wrote a little bit about it, tried to express myself to myself. I focused a lot on being grateful for the career that I'd had. None of us get to positions in leadership without being pretty good at what we did in the first place. So every single person on this Zoom call will have a lot of success in their career that they can reflect on. We've all had problems, we've all had difficulties, but we've had a lot of success. And sometimes it's worth reflecting on that and being grateful. Gratitude to me is a hugely powerful emotion. And I think it's really important to be grateful. But you have to sometimes really focus yourself on it when you're feeling a little bit down, or a little bit distant, or a little bit cut off. So I did a lot of that. I still do that, and I kind of recognize that need for me. But then you supplement that and replace that with doing other things, and just having a look around and realizing that school's school, and some of the stuff that I've talked to colleagues both in my old school and other colleagues, and things that seemed really important, big issues when I was doing the job. You see, the second year of retirement, they just aren't, because they're not your responsibility. And there's nothing you can do about them. You did it, you did your best when you were there. You no longer have that responsibility or that accountability. And time is a great healer for that. And it's into my second year, it feels very, very different. I'm much more relaxed than it did at the beginning. Whenever you're trying to manage all these different emotions that we've talked about.
Yeah. And I think building on what you were saying, Sinead and Ralph, I think the privilege is to choose the best chocolates out of the box after you finish. I loved most of my time as a teacher and a head, but there was an awful lot that I'm not missing. But the stuff I really enjoyed, the mentoring, the coaching, and so on, I've been able to keep that. I've been able to do a bit of that as a governor, a bit of that as a trustee. So I feel very lucky that I can still share a bit of expertise, but also actually I'm getting real pleasure from growing or helping to grow another generation of leaders, which perhaps is a bit selfish, but is great fun.
There's something here that I'm hearing from all of you. So one of the questions really nicely put in the chat there is around the fear of losing a sense of identity and sense of purpose. But actually listening to you all, I feel like you are certainly not purposeless, and you're not without identity. It clearly is different from what it was before, but it feels like you're on the other side of this river that other people are approaching. And whilst your circumstances might be different, you still seem to have a clear sense of what you want in your lives and setting out to get that, which I find quite inspiring.
Yeah.
It's important to realize that,
Sorry.
that, you are who you are, and a lot of these emotions and skills and talents and interests, they're already there. That sense of curiosity is already there. You just haven't maybe had time to explore those options because you've been so busy. So you've got a whole bank of stuff in your head and in your heart that maybe you're ready to explore, and enjoy it. As I said, not mean to repeat myself, but be grateful for the opportunity, and stay positive. And because it is a tough thing for some people, and you've got to be aware of that, and you may find it yourselves. But I think that you get to explore aspects of your character and your personality that maybe you haven't had the same opportunity, or as much of an opportunity to do in the last number of years. So, don't forget that you are who you are, and you're not just a teacher or a head teacher or a head of key stage or whatever, a vice principal, whatever it is. Everybody's got more to them. But I think school sucks a lot of that out sometimes, and we maybe forget that actually there's a whole lot more to us.
Yeah.
And retirement helps us.
I do. I role play as a patient for a nurse training at a university. And so, they write and say, right, it's end of life, you're about to die, you have to make all your arrangements. So you go through all this, and often they give you a task of being very difficult and grumpy, and you have to do that with the nurses and push them and really make them have to respond to you. And that's wonderful, because you're teaching a generation of nurses coming through, and but yeah, you're in the very sort of junior position, in that they're the nurse and you're the patient, and that's fascinating. To be on the other end of it, while they're sort of saying, well, they're in charge, but you're helping them to kind of get there.
Something lovely in all of this, which I think is, so I don't work in school, as you know, but I work on an education timetable, and I'm, my life is ruled by terms, and there's a real intensity to term time, and then I get, nice breaks when they come. But there's something about being, I think, in education, I see it and I relate to it, where the busyness of the doing is very all consuming. And there's a way in which we can value what we can accomplish. But what I'm hearing from all of you also is the shift to just being, actually. And so, Anne, I can hear you doing the supporting the nurses with their learning, as an example. You're still the same person who would have been doing whatever you were doing with classes when you were leading drama or English. But it's that shift from maybe not being so defined by the thing that you do, and having a bit more space to be yourself. That feels very palpable, actually, from all the different examples that you're giving.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on a question here that colleagues asked. And I know that some of you certainly will have been supporting other colleagues who are approaching retirement or who have retired. And I guess it's a question around finances. And have you observed with people who you've seen or been close to as they've gone through this, that there is a big shift financially that people have had to deal with, or have you observed that most people have kind of got enough sorted that they're secure and can live, let's say, not in poverty, live well enough? And if you've seen folks struggle financially, were there any things that you observed or thought, oh, we should be aware of?
I think I would suggest that at the start, and some of the sort of soundest advice I got financially, and bear in mind I'm only in my second year, I think most people make a kind of commitment to enjoy some of their money in the early days and actually treat yourself a little bit. I certainly done that. I just turned 60, and believe me, I'm treating myself, and I'm very happy to do that. It won't last forever, but I think the advice I got was, for those first 7, 8 years of retirement, spend a little bit more than you normally would, or that you maybe get through your pension, you use your lump sum or whatever, where maybe other sources of money, because in whatever 7, 8, 10 years, the government are going to give you a pension that you have kind of not allowed for. So that's like a gift almost. It mightn't be a lot of money, but it's still significant. And it's going to come at a time when you're probably going to be slowing down a little bit in terms of maybe the amount of money you're spending on, say, travel or something like that. So I think it's important to not feel guilty about enjoying yourself a little bit and treating yourself. It feels good. It feels good to be able to spend money on yourself or your family at times, as we've already alluded to. It's not that aren't nothing to do with the term and nothing to do with expensive holidays and school holiday times. So at the initial time, I think it's absolutely fine to just maybe spend a few things, treat yourself a little bit, and then work yourself into it. You eventually will work that out of your system, I think. And I've seen other people do that. The first 2 or 3 years, they've enjoyed themselves, and then they've settled down into a different routine because they find themselves more comfortable with, being retired and doing whatever it is they're doing. And it might take a couple of years to work out your new schedule, if you like. So spend a bit more at the start.
Yeah,
Yes, I'd agree with that totally. It's taken me a while though, because I've always been very thrifty. But I was talking to a financial advisor, and he said, "Spend it, go on." And I think I agree with you, Rafe, that you can, and there's a whole world out there to explore, isn't there? In whatever way you do. I go to the theatre all the time, but the cost of tickets now is phenomenal.
Yeah, that'll suck it up. That'll
Yes,
save
it
you
does.
money.
I definitely agree with both. I think pragmatically as well, regularly checking that your pension is right as you go through your teaching career. I think a lot of some colleagues I've talked to assumed that it was going to be right, and then had a bit of a shock when they realised that perhaps they were missing a year in service or something like that. The other thing I found really positive, and I don't know if others have had this, was I was lucky enough to have a financial advisor that said, how much would you like to live on? Didn't just look at how much you would live on, but actually we were quite proactive about how would we like that first few years of our retirement to look as well, which very much picks up on Ralph and Anne's point there.
Well, and I guess that's something, if folks haven't already done it, then it probably is important to make sure that I mean, great if you're yourself so financially literate that it all makes perfect sense to you, then well done. But if it's not crystal clear, then I don't think you can take advice too early, really, because the earlier you look at it, the more opportunity you have to do something differently.
Mm.
I think a lot of people like to avoid pensions because they just seem a bit. But I guess I would certainly counsel people, if you haven't, then please do look at it. Particularly, actually, I'm going to make a comment here. I think oftentimes I notice women don't look at their pension information, and maybe don't have confidence around their own financial literacy. That's a gross generalization, so please don't, don't jump on me for that. But I just more mean, if there are folks around you who are beginning to think about this, I think make it part of the conversation to be discussing getting a good handle on what's happening financially. I think that's
and because you never know what's going to come up. I've got two friends who've got children who've emigrated to Australia, and they have to go out there every year, and it costs a bomb. So you don't know what's going to come up in the future in that way.
Yeah. And Mary's made the point about checking your national insurance contributions. Also, if you've had maternity breaks or other career breaks, you may find that you need to backfill there, and there may well be an opportunity to do that. So take that on. Another kind of point that I wanted to just gently touch on is, it seems to me, again, observing people around me and beginning to think about my own horizon wherever it comes, that relationships are really interesting around retirement, because you're in this transition yourself from one identity to another way of living. And if you're either in a relationship, or maybe you're thinking about having a new relationship, or you're beginning a new relationship, or in fact, maybe it's not even in terms of somebody that you're partnered to, it can be with friends and family as well. Relationships feel like a place where, when we are in change, in a state of flux, in a transition, some of the dynamics can be unexpected, because I guess one thing changes and everything else is affected, but not always obviously. Again, when you think about your peer groups and the groups, has that been something that you've seen?
I think one of the things, obviously, that a lot of us happens round about the time of retirement is that one's parents begin to be either ill or die, and that again that means another transition that you have to go through, or they become very dependent on you, and you've got all this time now, so it's expected, so that there are all those sort of things down the road.
That's a big thing. And actually, I think bereavement, I know even for myself, I see in my close people more illness, and there are bereavements. And that's a kind of a life cycle point, isn't it? But I guess there's a lot that goes on there too.
Yeah. And I think there's a very interesting dynamic in that I retired 18 months before Sue, my wife. So I had a kind of one type of retirement for 18 months, and then now we're having kind of more of a shared one, and that dynamic of together and apart is quite an interesting reality, because we used to meet occasionally when we were both working, but that was about it. And so I think Anne, you said about that as well, or Ralph, I can't remember.
Yes,
sorry.
my partner's much younger than me, and he only retired last year. I've been retired 15 years, so I kind of got used to doing things on my own, and being quite able to be independent. But now we can do things together, so I do that more now. But yes, it's very much important where your partner is on that journey.
I think too. I'm like John. I'm sort of ahead of my wife, but in terms of retirement. But the other thing that's interesting, I don't know if it's the same for the others. The whole working from home thing means that person isn't anywhere else. They're actually in the same house. You're off work. We didn't work from home when we, teachers, we worked in schools. I'm at home now, but so is she, and she's on Zoom calls a lot of the time. So we hear these voices. She works hear lots of Americans talking to her from upstairs. It's kind of a weird existence, and I was never experienced it before. So that whole relationship thing, as Anne said, you've got your parents. I unfortunately didn't have mine, but then I have two sons who or three sons, but two of whom live in London. That's a good way of spending some of your money, by the way, if you ever go and visit them. Fleece is the verb that they're looking for. But getting to see them more often is great. Developing that side of your life, and visiting other places where they may be. I've one in Belfast, and as I say, two in London. So that's lovely as well. But I think the whole relationship thing, it definitely is transitory, and I think you're absolutely right, Sinead. It's something that maybe you don't think about that beforehand, but it will be something that will occur to you at some point fairly early on. And then, of course, the other side is making new connections, and not even necessarily new best friends, just being in different social groups, chatting to people in the same town that you live in. John's probably met people that he's walked past hundreds of times and never paid much attention to. Now maybe he's had a conversation with them. All those little things build up that sense of purpose and resilience and contentment. I think that's really important. It doesn't all have to be massive issues. It can be slow and small, steady steps.
I hadn't really thought about this point until you said it. And I guess I think about in my own life, like I'm living in London, fleecing away myself here, Ralph. And for me in my life, the points in time where I've made friends, obviously university is a moment in time, and then you're in your kind of first flush of youth, and that's a different stage of life. When you have kids, maybe you meet other families around through the kids and through other families at the school, and you've got maybe pals you've met through work. But there aren't, once you kind of get into your, I don't know, 40s, there aren't that many opportunities to meet new friends necessarily. But it seems like this, it hadn't occurred to me, but this is, of course, a point in life where you're suddenly potentially co-located with other people who've shared interests, and that hadn't been a thing before. So it feels like, so is this like another moment where there's the possibility of a lot of new connections potentially?
I think so. I think if by definition, if you start something new, a new hobby, even if it's in the place that you live that you haven't been, in something you haven't been involved with, you will meet new people, you will discover new things, and usually when you get into something, there's a whole lot more people than you expect involved in it. So yes, absolutely. People need people, as somebody once said, and making connections is massive. It's not like you're looking to make a whole new suite of best friends. It's just about getting to know people and have those social connections for the period that you're engaged in that activity or that group.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that because every time I do a new play, you meet a whole lot of new people. And once you've done a play together, you are bonded for life.
Well, clearly I need to take up a theatre habit.
Yeah. Absolutely, darling.
And I think the other thing is, as Ralph said, you start something new, you meet new people with new interests. They have a range of interests, and then it just keeps widening and widening out. And, you meet the most fascinating people that have got the most different lives that I ever lived as a worker. And it's just fantastic.
Lovely. And then talk to me about the first winter of retirement. I'm looking at you, John, because you're the lad who's out there tending the gardens and the allotment and whatnot. The first winter, that seems like a particular thing.
One of my friends, again, who retired but wasn't in teaching, said, beware the first winter. He said there's only so much decorating and housework and things you can do. And reflecting on that, I chose to join a gym, which meant that just the 15-minute drive, the hour in the gym, the 15-minute drive back, broke up some pretty manky weather days. And I would have found
was this a new thing? Had you been a gym person before?
No. And I know I would have found that really difficult because I'm not, unlike Anne, I'm not a hobbyist. So I've got to be outside either doing sport or gardening or something like that. So I think, beware the first winter, although that sounds a bit serious, doesn't it?
Well, it seems like helpful. It seems like a really helpful thing to know that you've put a routine in place that gets you out. You're not getting drenched and too miserable. And you've also, you've also all talked about travel. And I'm imagining that, there's a lot of pleasure to be had in going somewhere that's not raining in, January or whatever it is.
And you can.
Yeah,
And you can.
yes, you can, and as I said earlier, you can probably afford to do it more easily or more readily, perhaps than you think you can, and you shouldn't worry too much about that. But I think you don't have to go very far away. I think somebody has just put on the screen there a really good point, and it reminded me, get out every day.
Yeah.
Don't stay inside. It's a lot. Why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
Just get out for an hour, go for a walk, because you can guarantee, no matter where you are, even if it's somewhere familiar or somewhere not, you will meet people. You will see people doing things that you wouldn't have seen when you were working. And if you've got that sense of curiosity, or just opening your eyes and getting a different sense of what people do out there, I find that really, I find that invigorating and really liberating. Because as I say, schools are like silos. They're very, very intense environments, but they're only one part of the real world. And when you get outside, you realize the real world is very different to the one that you experienced as a worker. So I think that getting out and about, just you don't have to do anything special, just get out or even go for a drive, go and find somewhere else, go and get a cup of coffee and maybe hook up with other people that, as we've all said, peers who have retired. I've done a bit of that as well. And you kind of mix and match, you don't do the same sorts of things. I vary my routines quite a lot, and I find that helps me.
Yeah, I like a bit of structure. So I have my 2 ballet classes a week, and Pilates, and my literature class, and I walk with my colleagues, and so I just like I've got lots of things to do every week, every day of the week,
Nice. Well,
and
I think
without any pressure.
Yeah,
I'm going to be
that's it.
earmarking some of my lump sum for a good winter coat so that I can go out and be dry.
Yeah.
Um, that certainly, I think, is good advice. Of course, we live in a place that has a winter, so you might as well embrace it.
Yeah. And you've got
Um,
time to relax and have a shower or get dried when you come back
Yeah,
home. Maybe you don't
exactly.
have a job. It's
Long hot
great.
bath.
So
it's-
you just take your time.
you don't have to stay in wet socks all
No,
day.
you don't have to stay.
It's looking good, guys. I also want to touch on something because we talked about family, and as I think about folks I know who have been in, gone through their retirement, and I've seen it's been interesting watching people who were very busy in their career reconnecting with their adult children, and in some cases that's gone really well, and in other cases their adult children are like, we haven't done this. I don't know how to do this. We don't have a mode for this because we haven't had this much time together. So there's been some interesting stuff there, but also um, some really brilliant parts of being a grandparent, and some folks who, and you use the term grandmaship, some folks who have had grandmaship thrust upon them, perhaps more than they immediately wanted.
Yeah.
So grandparents, I think we know we live in a time where grandparents in this country are more involved in childcare than maybe they historically were. Um, do any of you have any things you've observed or seen around that?
Yes, I think I've got friends who've had 4 children, and they've got 3 or 4 grandchildren each, and it can become a monster of expectation of your time, and people have to make boundaries about that, I think. But it is one of the great joys, I must say, of not having to work, is being able to have some time with them when they're very young. It's absolutely wonderful.
Lovely. I come from a traditionally large Irish family. My grandmother had scores of grandchildren, and I think the poor woman must have spent her retirement, writing, getting birthday presents. I think that literally was a full-time job.
Yes.
So yeah, I can relate to that. Um, there's a question in the chat there. Has anyone used the University of the Third Age?
My brother
Not yet, but
actually
it's on the
lectures in
horizon.
Cambridge at the University of the Third Age, but I have several friends who do that, and I have thought of doing it myself at times, but I've never had time. But I think it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful, and provides enormous amounts of options for people to partake in.
Fantastic. And Ralph, you were making a comment there.
Yeah, I think it just struck me there as I was saying that, that's just one of many types of organizations, and there are hundreds of them.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit of a minefield, actually. And again, look and learn and take your time to find out. I think the other point I would make, and speaking from personal experience, I'm part of a generation which is maybe not new, but it's relatively new, of retiring in their mid to late 50s. There's a lot of people out there retiring at that time. People aren't working beyond 60. Certainly, in teaching, I don't think, it's certainly not in headship. So there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of potential out there to tap into, and people who are interested and still, able to do a lot of things like exercise, like get involved in intellectual pursuits, and they've got lots of time to do it. So I think the options for retirees now are on the increase. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that certainly as an NAHT person, we need to learn to tap into a little bit, because there's a lot of wasted talent and skills and interests maybe that
Yeah.
and connections that kind of go by the wayside. So we are part of a new generation of retirees who are fitter and want to do more and want to
Yeah.
do it for longer and probably can. So I think
Yeah.
that's something to maybe be aware of. And U3A is one thing, but there are lots of other things. And I haven't personally as yet gone to a class. I am thinking about it at the moment. I'm trying to find out what I really want to do. So there's a whole world that I haven't even entered into yet.
Yeah.
And I think everybody can experience that. There's a lot out there to do if you look for it.
Yeah. We also talked, didn't we, about the realities of volunteering for lots of things as well, because I think probably the background of school leaders makes you a prime candidate to suddenly be voted as chair, or and I think you have to, as with anything, you have to manage that, and you have to, I think you said, Sinead, yesterday, you have to be very honest and upfront with the groups you're volunteering with or meeting with, and saying, this is how much I can commit, this is the way I want to commit.
Yeah.
So that you can continue to enjoy it as well as everybody else.
Yeah.
It's a really important point. You have to get something out of it. It has to work both ways.
Yes, I have a friend who with other people in her parish, set up a nursery school in Kalimpong in India. And when she turned 80, she got a little legacy. And so the two of us went to India to the school, and they just made such a fuss of her and garlanded her like mad. But she'd been working, for ages, collecting money, finding ways of getting money to help fund this place. And it was an amazing achievement.
Oh, brilliant.
Volunteering, exactly. Teachers, very good at it.
Very good. And volunteering all the way through the job, which is a point Roz has just picked up.
Of course we did.
So listen, I'm going to come to each of you and ask you for like the pearl of wisdom you want folks to take away from this conversation. No pressure now, no pressure. And you've got to hope. I'm going to come to Anne first, then John, then Ralph. So Ralph, I'm really sorry. I'm leaving you there. They're going to have to take all the best ones. But just to give you good notice.
One thing.
Before you do, Anne, I just want to say to colleagues on the call, the two things I want to let you know, and my colleagues at Education Support might post into the chat at this point. One is, if you're thinking about this and and if it's stressful for you to think about this, if you're not comfortable, if you're worried about stuff, if you're just not quite sure, please know that our helpline is there, the 08000 562 561 number. It's not for crises. You can phone up and have a chat with someone who's just really good at having a conversation. That doesn't mean they're going to give you answers, but it means you can hear yourself think, because that's how we work as humans.
Yeah.
So please use that number if it's at all useful for you. That's what it's there for. And the second point I wanted to make is that we have a new guide we've published with the NAHT. We're dead proud of it, actually. But we'll wait to see what you say. So take a look at it and give us some feedback. I'm really proud of what colleagues have done to pull it together, and I think it's really useful. At least I found it so myself. So I'll be really interested to hear your feedback if you have a chance to take a look at it. And that's of course all free and available to everyone. So Anne, your pearl of wisdom you want to send folks away with?
Well, I would just say, it's something to enjoy. It really is something to enjoy, because there are no pressures on you to do something you have to do. You can suit yourself and construct your retirement in a way that makes you happy.
I love that. Suit yourself. John.
Right, I'm going to dumb it down. Go on holiday on the first day of term after you retire.
Lovely. Lovely. Love that. Excellent. And enjoy the prices, man. Enjoy the prices of doing that, right? That's going to be brilliant. And Ralph, what is the thing that you want to
Okay.
send people away
Well,
with?
being verbose, I'm going to add a little bit more. And you just give me, this sounds like a dovetail moment. You just mentioned the word price. Um, think about the pace of it, reflect on it, take the time to reflect, keep your identity, stay curious, and engage with it. So end up, make your own price and don't pay somebody else's for it.
I love that. I love that. Well, listen, I think that for a lot of people who begin to think about retirement, it can sound quite frightening. And I think it can feel like it's all about an ending. And actually, what I've come away from this conversation with is it's all about a beginning.
Beginning.
And I don't feel concerned. Actually, I feel quite excited that there is another chapter that's going to be a different thing again with lots of possibility in it. So thank you for creating that feeling. Really, really lovely. Really appreciate it.